Hello, class. We'll be reading chapter 6 this week. It's all about description, how to create finding aids. So, what is a finding aid? Well, finding aids are guides or descriptive inventories of collections, papers, records, archives. What I call pre-finding aids are any information that is taken off of an accession list. When you receive a collection, you will most likely fill out an accession form, and that'll give the date you received it, the donor, the name of the collection, what's in the collection, maybe how many boxes came in, an idea of the date range, although you may not know exactly until you do a survey. But it's got some good basic information that will definitely help you in creating a finding aid. In fact, I always tell my students when you have to process a collection and you want to start surveying it, even before the survey, look at the accession record. There may be some interesting information that will help you for your survey. And then the survey itself, which is basically an inventory, a basic inventory of the collection, not always item by item, especially if the collection is huge. You couldn't do item by item. Smaller ones, yeah. But nevertheless, a survey or inventory is a good preliminary finding aid, and that too will help you organize your collection. And then understanding the provenance of the collection, how the collection came about, where it came from, what it was used for. When you protect provenance by not mixing them up with other collections, you actually can use provenance to help you find the real organization, or at least if you can't find it exactly because it's kind of mixed up, you can certainly create a good finding aid for that collection. So, what is contained in a finding aid? Well, basically, right at the beginning of a finding aid, you get a lot of different fields that represent a basic abstract of the collection. So I'm going to go through a series of fields that you will find in a finding aid. But I do want to let you know that not every field is found in a finding aid. Sometimes um, you may find in one finding aid processing notes, but another one from another institution may not have that. But I'm going to list what I consider important fields in a finding aid. And finding aids can be typed up with a word processor, or it can be cataloged online using various types of machine readable cataloging or formats. But I'll talk about that at the end of this, which is not something you have to worry about because we're not going to get into that heavily. So one of the fields you'll find in a finding aid, which is under the abstract, is the collection title and the name of the creator. If you receive a collection from Dr. Philip Morris, it could his family papers, it could be called, Dr. Philip Morris Papers, and the name of the creator is Dr. Philip Morris. So you see what I'm getting at here. And then you'll find that another important piece of information in a finding aid is the inclusive dates, and that's the date range of the collection. So you determine what is the earliest dated document, 1910, and the last dated document, 2001. So it'd be 1910 to 2001. Now, once in a while, you'll find documents that have no dates. Now, you can look at the condition of the paper. Maybe you can match it up with some similar documents that do have dates. But you know what? You're never really quite sure. So when I have some documents that don't have a date, I actually make my inclusive dates like this. N period, D period, comma, 2010 dash to 2000, say 11. And ND stands for no date. And that gives the user kind of a heads up that some of these are difficult to date because they don't have dates. And then there's bulk dates. Now, the bulk dates are the chronological or period strength of a collection. That means the earliest and latest dates of the majority of the materials being described. So what I'm saying here is that in your collection between that is where the date range is 1910 to 2011, most of the items in your collection are dated between 1940 and 1955. So that's your bulk date, and you would put that down. Now, with smaller collections, it's kind of hard to find bulk dates because they may not have bulk dates. It could be just very nicely spread out between 1910 and 2011. So in that case, you don't list bulk dates. Processor of the collection. That's the person who processed the collection. That's pretty important. So you put your name here. If there's any questions about the collection that the curator needs to know, or the head archivist, they're going to go to the processor and say, in this collection there was such and such. I don't see it in this collection. When you were processing it, did you notice it? Or where did you put this particular item? So the processor's name is very important. It's just checks and balances. And then the extent of the collection. The word extent means the size of the collection, and usually identified by the number of boxes, not so much the size, the number of boxes in a linear feet. So you could have like 25 manuscript size boxes and 2 oversized boxes. Some archives will list it like this: 10 boxes, comma, 2 oversized boxes. I mean, there's all kinds of ways, but the important thing is that you list the number of boxes and the linear feet. And that's the length of the collection it takes up on the shelf. So if you have a collection that takes up 4 feet of shelf space, then you're going to say 4 linear feet. And then we have a brief outline or description of the collection. And that just is exactly what it means. You just do like a paragraph of what's in the collection. Very, very basic, just to get the user a brief, quick idea. That's pretty much all that is. And then you can list any related materials. Not all collections have related materials, but let's say in yours you have other collections in your archives that would be very useful and beneficial to the researcher because they have related materials. It's almost like the old-fashioned in the card catalog that would say, see also, and then you go to another subject catalog card that can take to other materials that pertain to the information you're seeking. And then, of course, the manuscript number, which is assigned to the collection. Now, all this is contained in the abstract, and it doesn't have to be in this particular order, but basically that is what is in the beginning of the finding aid, what we call the abstract area. And then what's the rest of the finding aid information? Well, you're going to have information about the acquisitions. That means the whole process of accessioning the collection where it came from is the acquisition. So here's an example. So here's a Robert B. Appleby collection. Tells you who donated it, why it was named, and the accession numbers. Now this came to the archives in 3 different days. They're not 3 different collections. I mean, if they were 3 different collections, we wouldn't be mixing them up because we don't want to destroy provenance. But this gentleman gathered his paper little by little and would bring them in and say, I'm going to bring you some more. I got some more I'm going to bring. All the same collection. But you list that you're letting the user know that this came in 3 separate accessions. And then you got provenance, the most important. And provenance is the history of the collection, how it evolved, where it came from, and why it was gathered or collected or compiled. So here's an example. Again, Mr. Robert B. Appleby. So this tells you a little bit of history of the collection, his relationship with the Maine Maritime Museum. It tells you that there's nothing documented about this man's time at the museum, but only through anecdotal stories. So you say that. He spent time in the museum. He was very knowledgeable maritime history. He was very respected. He was the historian at the Penobscot Marine Museum for many years. His wife died and donated his collection during his work with the Customs Services, and she donated them to the Penobscot Museum, but a small portion was donated to the Maine Maritime Museum. So this tells you all about how this collection evolved. Sometimes, depending on the size of the collection or the uniqueness or novelty of the collection, provenance information could be very, very heavy. In other words, it could take a whole page, not just a paragraph. So provenance is very important in archives. Now, we also got copyright information, any restrictions. Usually copyright information is pretty much at the beginning of a document. Sometimes it's not, but it pretty much says who has copyright. Usually the archives has copyright, but sometimes they have correspondences that don't have copyright to. And they'll say that if you want to use these correspondences for your research, they advise you to contact the donor or the creator. So copyright information is very important. And then also restrictions, like usually collections and archives don't have restrictions. They're open up for research. In fact, sometimes collection policies say they will only collect those materials that are open to researchers. They don't like to have things locked up and not available. Or sometimes restrictions talk about conditions of records. So say you have personal papers and there's a scrapbook that's really fragile. So the restriction can be open for research. However, a scrapbook is very fragile, and you will need assistance from the librarian to access it. So just anything that has to do with restrictions. And then physical description. Not all finding aids have this. Depends on institutions. Certainly museum collections is pretty big. And that's just describing the condition of the collection. Any interesting notations, any damages to the materials, anything that you might have done if you used a tacking iron to lightly flatten curled documents. So physical description is important. It's a good time or a good place also mention how some need special care. And then we have biographical or historical notes and scope and content. So starting first with biographical and or historical notes. If you have a collection of papers from a particular person, you're going to do research on this person. You're going to do biographical notes. We need to know who this person is. If you're doing, if you're processing records of a business, then historical notes about how the business evolved. And in the Maritime Museum, we had records of vessels and like one collection of one particular vessel. And so we actually did historical notes on the vessel, how, when it was built, who designed it, and so forth. Sometimes we'd have biographical and historical notes. It just depends on what's in the collection. And sometimes more than one biographical note. And then scope and content notes are really important because they actually give you a more detailed description of what's in the what you're going to find in the collection. And anything unique about an item in a collection that is very important for the users to know. And sometimes when we want to make a specific index for the collection, we sometimes put it in the scope and content notes or right after scope and content notes. So here's an example of a scope and content note. It's a very simple one paragraph about the Appleby collection. I'm not going to read it here. You can read it, of course, yourself. I do want to point out that the larger the collection, the more deeper the scope and content notes are going to be. I had processed a very large collection. I think it had 180 boxes. And my scope and content notes were quite heavy because there were interesting things that needed to be pointed out so that the user could find the information they were looking for. So novel things, rare things, unusual things, moving things into different locations and letting them know where it is, so forth. Anyways, that's scope and content notes. And then processing notes. Now this is really important. Processing notes tells the user how you decided to organize the collection. Certainly if it was all of a mishmash, you're going to explain why you created this particular organization. You should also mention how you handle fragile items. Anything that you move and put somewhere else for a particular reason, you must identify what you moved and why. Anything you do, you must notate it. It is important to know how you processed a collection so the user knows what you have done with the collections as well as the senior curator, so that if he or she has questions, they can come to you. And it's very, very important. Archivists are very persnickety, I think they should be, about their processing notes. And then we got series description and organization of the series. So remember in the assignment we had find a series in the collections, and so you just listed a series. Some of you had series titles that were very detail oriented, but that kind of language isn't used in archives finding aids. So, instead of putting photographs from Grand Picnic in October, would be the name of the series. It would just be photographs, because your series description describes what's in the photograph, so you don't have to give it these long names. So I'm going to give you an example. So here's an example of a series description for the Appleby collection. So series 1, crew lists and crew related documents. Series 2, clearance certificates. You notice it didn't say clearance certificates to foreign ports, just clearing certificates. The third one is cargo and freight. It didn't say cargo and freight with identifying marks of shippers and consignees. No, cargo and freight, or freight and cargo. And then we have enrollments and registers. It didn't say enrollments and registers for domestic trade in Bath, Maine. It's enrollments and registers. And then we had the last one, which is other documents. And these were unusual documents that had nothing to do with the custom house per se. It was like a bill of sale and vessel license. Well, it might have done with the custom house, but it just didn't fit in any of the other categories, so it was just called other documents. So what is important? Important is our processing notes. Very, very important. What is important? Series description and how you organize it. And then the last, which is the most important, is your container list. The container list assists the users where to find specific items or series. And the container list, which means what's in the box or what is in the boxes, will list the folders. All the folders are numbered and what box they're in. So usually like box 1 could have 20 folders. So there's folder 1 through 20 in box 1. But what if your collection had 2 boxes? Well, it would, and let's say box 1 had 20 folders and box 2 had 15 folders. You would actually number box 1 folders 1 through 20, and then box 2 you would start all over again, 1 through 15. You wouldn't carry the number over and go like 21, 22, 23, 24, and so forth. You really wouldn't do that, because what if you had to add a couple more folders that you didn't realize you needed to? You'd have to erase all those numbers, from a whole bunch of boxes, especially if you have like 10 boxes. So every time you have a new box or an additional box in the collection, you just start from the beginning and renumbering. And then added entries. These are subject headings, and you will find these in finding aids. And subject headings we call added entries. Archivists will use the Library of Congress subject headings and specific vocabulary. We call this thesaurus. So here's something that's going to be helpful to you to understand the differences between librarians that catalog and archivists that catalog and create finding aids. Because a finding aid basically is like a big, long-winded catalog. So in the archival world, a thesaurus is a specialized vocabulary of words and phrases commonly used for indexing that indicates a preferred term among synonyms and shows relations between terms. This is from the Society of American Archivists. These are specific vocabulary for specific collections. There are 4 specific thesauri that archivists use besides the Library of Congress. We've got the Art and Architecture thesauri. We have the College Archives thesauri. We have the CONA, that's Cultural Objects Name Authority thesauri, and ULAN for Union List of Artist Names thesauri and thesaurus. And I have the links here that can take you to these just so you can look at them. So we do use the Library of Congress, absolutely, but other special words. Now, there can also be specific vocabulary for a specific institution. And in the Maine Maritime Museum, they use the Library of Congress and specific terms that represent maritime history. They actually have a notebook that they created a very, very long time ago. They went to the Library of Congress, found subject heading that would pertain to anything in their collection, and then words that they did not find in the Library of Congress that they could also use.